Maybe we might have 10K for it, something like that, and the whole thing has to sort of uncompress once you get it out into the player's universe. Crazy ideas for planets. We had all these artists do all this visualization of what some of our strange planets might be like. And we wanted to, again, get a breadth from scary planets to playful planets, all, again, in the same kind of consistent aesthetic universe. So here are a couple examples of once you set these little agents loose on the planet and say, go carve an ocean, go build some mountains, what do you get?
This is actually an interesting kind of thing where what we learned in the texture scripting on the creatures turned out to be a very useful kind of conceptual framework for how we would do procedural terraforming of the planet.
Right. And the player's doing the same thing. You know, they're basically invoking these little things, and they crawl around the planet and make volcanoes and stuff like that. Just a quick example, so again, the planet has to look good when you're looking at the thing from over here, and then when you go all the way down over here, it can't fall apart, so we've got this giant level of detail problem. So here's an example of what one of the planets looks like once you get down to ground level and are playing the creature game. And they've got to exist across all these states, because the player might come back with his UFO and heat it up with a heat ray, and then the thing gets all lava-y, and then they kind of freeze it with a freeze ray, and then they whisk up all the atmosphere.
To explain this really quickly, any planet that the player made or the computer generated also had to transition through this state space that might happen depending on how you're modifying the climate in the space game. So this middle planet is kind of in balance in terms of
and these are the same planet, just going through different states. You can see the same landforms.
Yeah, so basically it's cold to hot in that dimension, and then it's very thick atmosphere to vacuum top to bottom. And so that's one planet making the transition through that space.
And so that was tricky, trying to get the whole thing to, just fit in a shader for the first case, but then make it so that something could look good as it transitioned across this landscape of ice ages to lava planets and stuff like that.
It's like at all sizes and at all states.
Yes, zoom in, zoom out, make it generate in 200 milliseconds, and make it transition across all these states. And then we have to populate the planets with stuff, rocks and giant toadstools and skeletons of dead animals and stuff like that. So here's an example of, if you go down, this is an early prototype, if you go down to a planet, the giant Swiss cheese planet, we thought maybe that might be a good idea. And here's what it looks like if you go down. And then this whole system for generating these planets has to be fully proceduralized. So this was a flowchart that I did showing, you start with a height field, then how do you get from there to something that looks professionally textured, looks like it was designed by a level designer, and has an atmosphere, and so you can zoom down and it's day sometimes and it's night sometimes. And this was an early prototype visualizing how that would work, where when you're looking down at the planet, it's got this sort of diaphanous blanket of atmosphere, and the sun flares through it, and then when you get all the way down to the ground looking up, it becomes this opaque blanket of atmosphere overhead. So we had to solve all these kind of problems, these technical problems that aren't, none of them are insurmountable. They're obviously all like, oh, I could come up with some ideas for that. But boy, it was just one after another. And then here's another visualization of all the different states that planets can be in. The planets that are really hot because they're close to the sun need to look baking, and then you have like these planets that are fantasy planets with little curlicues and swirls on them, and then you've got dead moon planets, gas giants, and you have a distribution of like a histogram of how many planets and how many potential planets can exist in the universe, and are more of them kind of like Mars or Earth, or more of them kind of like the Smurf planet.
Yeah, as you're flying around discovering planets, we wanted some of the really unusual planets to feel like treasures.